Police Chief Matt Burns, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. We are here today to release the 2019 crime stats. As you know, in 2019, Sioux Falls experienced continued population growth with an estimated 3,550 people added to our community. We certainly felt the effect of this at the police department as our calls for service reached a record 122,885 calls, which was a 3% increase over 2018. Despite that growth, High End Police report that our crime rates remain stable at 35.6 property crimes and 4.98 violent crimes reported per 1,000 population. These rates remained relatively flat, as you can see on the chart, in comparison to previous years, and we see that as a very positive thing. So as in past years, we saw the increase in reports in some categories and decrease in others. On the positive side, the numbers of homicides, rapes, robberies, suicides, and arson all remained at the same level or decreased from last year. Conversely, all manner of assaults and several property crimes saw modest increases. However, these increases did not exceed the rate of our population growth. Without question, though, the largest challenge that our community continues to face is the trafficking of illegal drugs. These drugs, specifically methamphetamine, continue to be the largest driver of the crime reported to our department. But that is also the area in which I have some important news to offer. In 2019, the Sioux Falls Area Drug Task Force seized a record of 133.3 pounds of methamphetamine while investigating 3,043 narcotics cases. Both of these were records. This amount was more than double the 56.3 pounds seized in 2018, which itself was a record. While these figures are cause for concern, it also points to the tremendous amount of time and effort put in by the Drug Task Force, the Narcotics Crime Unit, and the patrol officers, in addition to deputies in Minnehaha County, to reach this level of success. The drugs they seized are truly kept off our streets and out of our schools. This effort reflects the priorities of not only my office, but that of the mayor and the city council, who recognize the challenges that narcotics bring to our community, and they have given us the tools to effectively combat it. The United Front also sends a strong message to drug dealers and suppliers that we take this threat very seriously, and that Sioux Falls law enforcement is successful at putting them out of business and holding them to account. Overall, the statistics you see indicate to me a growing city that remains quite safe, but we certainly have our challenges, but we are also well-positioned and well-resourced to effectively deal with them. The residents and visitors to our city are well served by the dedicated men and women of our department and of our public safety partners. And with that, I'd like to introduce the mayor.
All right, thanks, Chief. All right, good morning. First, want to thank Chief Burns, Assistant Chief Hoekstra, the rest of the PD leadership that's here today. I don't get in front of you guys often on the crime briefings because I also know my lane. We got incredible leadership in the PD, but this is the one time every year when I like to get up and talk about a very important issue to a lot of our residents, crime, and also the narcotics issue, which the chief alluded to. And people often do ask me, is Sioux Falls still safe? We don't feel safe, or we do feel safe, or we think it's still safe, we don't think it's safe. This community is incredibly safe. And the reassuring number that I always watch year after year is what's happened with violent crimes in our city. That's what we want to really keep an eye on. And as our chart indicates, our violent crimes per 1,000 residents has been a pretty flat number. Sioux Falls is a growing community. But in the midst of all this growth come challenges, and one of those is our battle against meth and drug use. But meth continues to be one of the primary drugs that causes a lot of heartache and a lot of challenges in our city. You've seen it at the state level with the governor's focus on the crackdown on meth through an awareness campaign, but also through the resources that she's putting at this issue. I think we're also seeing the effects of methamphetamine on a local level, which is evidenced by far a record seizure, over 100% more methamphetamine seized this year than last year. And last year was about a 400% increase over the year before. So two ways to look at those numbers, and I choose to look at them as a very glass half full report. We have an incredible drug task force. We have an incredible narcotics crimes unit. The public needs to know that we have an incredible police force that is working hard, a record number of investigations, as the chief alluded to. that is dedicated to getting this poison off of our streets. We also continue to make strides not only in the enforcement, but also the education and the prevention and the treatment of narcotics. So obviously when you're in a PD conference room, you're talking about the enforcement side, but I would also be lying if I didn't say the chief, the sheriff, others have been huge proponents of the triage center that we signed the bylaws on earlier this month, or last month I should say now, and will be opening later this fall. We also recently added a dedicated officer with a social work background to the PD in our community resource officer team, who will work with folks struggling with mental illness, even addiction challenges. And so someone who can be kind of an interstitial and can understand some of those mental health and behavioral health challenges that some folks that are dealing with addiction are experiencing. Her name is Officer Sarah Van Vorst. She's hitting the ground running, and she's been a fantastic addition to that role already. Last month, towards the end of last month, I also launched a large mentorship initiative. And there's a connection between crime and mentorship. And with some of the numbers that you see in crime, we don't break it out, but there's a lot of juvenile crime that we see in our city. And how do we get in front of juveniles and teens and young people to get them on a path for success in our community? If they're from a single-parent home or they don't have a successful role model in their life to follow, how can we change the course of some of the youth in our city? That's what that mentorship initiative is partially designed to do. It's also designed to help deal with felons and inmates that are done serving their sentence and have to be reacclimated into our community. It's our role and our job and our responsibility as a city to help them be successful so that they don't return to another stat on this board, but we get them into our workforce and we get them into being productive members of society. You know, since 2016, we've added 21 officers to the Sioux Falls PD, as well as an additional $7 million to the PD budget since 2016. Some of that has been dedicated to training. One thing that I've learned in the first 2 years in the chair as mayor is the amount of training that our officers have to do on an annual basis, not only to keep up with current trends, but always try to be one step ahead, is very intensive. And so our training budget is one area we certainly don't want to sacrifice, since we've added some more dollars to that. We're also going to be asking our city council to make a significant investment this year in a public safety training facility. That will be a shared facility with Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, which I know both Sioux Falls Fire Rescue and Sioux Falls PD will tell you we are in dire need of that facility. And so that will help train the next generation of officers in our city, the next generation of firefighters, fire prevention officers in our city. And so very needed, and I'm confident that the city council agrees with that well, and that we'll get funding for that later on this year. So, you know, in closing, I want to reinforce my continued commitment to safety in our city, continued commitment to the police officers, to the Sioux Falls PD, to the work that they're doing, specifically as it relates to narcotics. A lot of the crime numbers that we see, there's a narcotics thread that's woven through a lot of those. And that is why that's such a big challenge, but also an opportunity for us. And so under the leadership of Chief Burns and the entire police force, I feel we've made some great strides in the last couple of years, but the complacency is not an answer to the problem. An answer is to continue to keep our foot on the gas with our efforts, continue with our enforcement efforts, continue with our treatment efforts, our prevention efforts to ensure Sioux Falls stays a safe community, which it is. So with that, Chief and I would certainly take any questions you may have about the 2019 numbers or any other topics.
You mentioned the correlation between drugs and crime. What challenges does that create once those folks are arrested and in jail?
I appreciate that question greatly. So we've determined that a great percentage of our crime does have a narcotics nexus, either direct nexus because it's involved directly in the trafficking, the use, or the violent crime and property crime, frankly, that stems from supporting a drug habit. Once those persons get into jail, that addiction doesn't automatically just cease. So it's important that we have follow-up within the criminal justice system to get those folks the help they need. Certainly hold them to account for the crimes that they're responsible for, but also make sure that there's a support mechanism as that goes forward, because the addiction to an opiate, to a serious stimulant like methamphetamine or cocaine is extremely strong, and it changes the physiology of the brain, and it's not something that a person can just get over. That's why we've invested in the mental health and community resource officer with an emphasis on addictions, to treat this as a more holistic approach, because we know that we're not going to, per se, arrest our way out of an addiction problem. It's clearly a priority of the mayor and our department and the council to put the resources where it's needed, but they're needed in a lot of areas.
I want to share a little anecdotal story on that. About a month ago now, I did a ride along with our PD on a Saturday night, and we came across a gentleman who has serious addiction challenges. Surprisingly, he was not a known actor to this officer. Most of our officers kind of know who some of the frequent flyers are. Didn't know this gentleman. We responded to a call, got him in the car, pulled up his name in our Zerker software. There were a little north of 1,500 entries in the software for this gentleman. And if you think of the amount of dollars that one individual has cost the Sioux Falls Police Department, the county jail, Sanford and Avera's ER for using those as detox centers, the officer time, taking officers away from other priority calls to deal with this same individual that many times. Now, those weren't all calls. There may be one record and there's 3 entries per record, but it's a lot. And so that's why when you think of the challenge of narcotics, it's an expensive problem. That gentleman is $500,000 to $1 million in costs person in our city of what he's cost our courts, what he's cost the county, what he's cost the city. So that's why we're bullish on that. Not only is it the right thing to do for people's well-being, but for the taxpayers, it's a strain. It's a strain on the system. It's a strain on those officers having to deal with some regular people who are tying up what could be more priority needs within our department.
Just a question on some of the numbers. Obviously, I'm curious if heroin last year and cocaine this year were from one big bust per year, or because those are significant outliers compared to what the numbers were before.
So typically when you see a number like that, it's rarely from one significant bust. I will tell you that the methamphetamine numbers, there were some serious individual busts, significant busts inside that number. Those cases are still playing themselves out, specific as to the methamphetamine, and we'll go into the federal system. We'll have more to say about that as that news breaks in conjunction with our federal partners. But when you seize drugs, it is kind of a hit and miss proposition depending on where you're at in the investigation or the hierarchy of that organization that's trafficking it. You might seize cash one time in a higher ratio to the drugs, or maybe the next time it's drugs. So there's not any transitive property when it comes to drug investigations. And so when you look at those numbers, they can appear to be a little bit misleading.
Thank you for the clarification.
You bet.
Chief, can you touch on the fentanyl numbers? Is that something you guys are tracking new for this last year compared to years previously?
Yeah, we've been tracking fentanyl for a few years now, and we're seeing more of it, and that's consistent with the country, right? There's more fentanyl that's getting into our country through various means. That's greatly concerning to us. Fentanyl, as you know, is 50 times more powerful than morphine, and it's a synthetic drug. And that fentanyl is being adulterated into a lot of the drug supply, specifically heroin, and that, frankly, is what is killing people in the overdoses from opiates. We're seeing to a high degree. We're going to keep a close eye on that. That is concerning to us, but it's concerning throughout the region and across the country.
And then the ecstasy as well?
Ecstasy is ever present. That goes up and down. MDMA is the trade name, so it's just something that we continue to look at. And for some years you'll seize more than others. It's just kind of, if that's the, forgive the term, flavor of the day, but it's ever present in our community. Just wanes and waxes in popularity.
Talk about community involvement before. What do you want citizens of Sioux Falls to know? I mean, do they play a role in some of these drug arrests, like a direct role by calling?
Absolutely. There's very, very rarely would there be an instance where there's someone that has an addict in their family, in their circle of friends, and people that they know and care about that they don't understand what's going on or suspect that's going on. The best way, in our view, is to get inside and to interrupt that cycle is just to take a step out, to show them productively that you care about them, and to just put yourself out there a little bit and say, you know what, we've got to take a step here to interrupt this cycle, because it's not a positive cycle. It's going to continue to go down, spiral downward, on and on. It's something that we've seen that results in deaths in our community, and so what people can do is just get involved.
We also, to that point, our officers can only be so many places at so many times. So we do rely heavily on the community to help us with these numbers. We rely on Crime Stopper tips and call-ins, and we rely on the public to be part of making sure our community is safe. So if there's a concern in a neighborhood, if there's traffic coming and going all times of the night in a neighborhood at a specific home, that's worth a call to Crime Stoppers. Turn it in, turn it over to our officers, let them look into it. What we also encourage people to do, though, is to not be vigilantes on their own. That's what our officers are here for. Turn it over to them, let them investigate, let them determine if there's an issue that we need to look into further. But we rely on the public heavily. I think that's a theme we want to continue to drive home, is you all have a place in ensuring our community stays safe. And so be a good citizen watchdog. For us, that's important.
There is one additional point I want to make, and it goes to getting involved in the community and making those reports. So a little over a year ago, the mayor and I came up with a solution to a problem about being more direct involved in the neighborhoods with drug interdiction. And with his support, we created the Narcotics Crime Unit. Well, I can tell you, out of the 3,043 cases we investigated relevant to narcotics last year, 628 of those were handled by the Narcotics Crime Unit. And those are officers doing investigations right at the neighborhood level, where if a person calls in and say, I do have a lot of short-term traffic, or I'm got concerns that there's drug trafficking or dealing done out of this residence, those NCU officers will take on that investigation. They will do a search warrant if necessary, do the appropriate surveillance, and work that case to its logical conclusion, holding persons to account and keeping neighborhoods safe and getting those problem areas and residences back to a sense of normalcy in those neighborhoods. And that, as designed, allows the Drug Task Force officers to keep their eye on the ball of the larger drug trafficking organizations. And that is a significant reason that you see the drug seizure numbers that you do.
Have you noticed if the increase of drug-related issues have caused any PR issues for Sioux Falls at all?
I can speak to that. And I guess my short answer is no. What I have noticed is that for instance, I'll use this story. I have a friend in Mayor Francis Suarez in Miami, and we've gotten to know each other. We keep in touch a little bit. They don't have a meth problem in Miami. They have a huge cocaine problem, and we've kind of swapped some war stories about that and how they're dealing with that. And so nationally, there are drug challenges. The drugs may vary from market to market. In South Dakota and in the Midwest, we see a significant rise in methamphetamine right now. So is our problem different than Rapid City? If Mayor Allender is given the same press conference, I'm guessing Mayor Allender has some of these same numbers and some of these same issues that they're dealing with there. So what we try to do, though, is not hide from it. We don't not talk about this. We talk about, we have challenges with narcotics. This is what we're doing. The community needs to know this is what we're doing to address them. We're not running from it. We're not trying to sweep it under the rug. It's when those drug numbers start to have an impact on the violent crime rate that we start to really have issues that we need to address even more aggressively than we are now. And so to reinforce that, it's still a very safe community. The safety of the community has not changed greatly over the last 10 years as we've grown. That violent crime rate has stayed the same, which I'm very proud of the work that these folks have done to keep that steady.
So when you talk about methamphetamine, where's that coming from? Are we seeing manufacturing within the state, or is it manufactured somewhere else and shipped up?
So there used to be a lot more manufactured locally in what we termed meth labs. And you can see on the chart, last year we had 2 meth labs that were discovered, And frankly, the two prior years, there were zero. So that's just not happening anymore as the meth lab's local manufacturer. Where it's coming from primarily, and this is directly from the intelligence we received from our federal partners in the DEA, is across the southern border in Mexico. There are huge mega labs that produce it on an industrial scale with a high level of purity, and that's coming up through established trafficking routes into our country, into South Dakota, and eventually makes its way into Sioux Falls. The sheriff said this, and I believe the same, that it's never been more available and it's never been cheaper, which follows the supply and demand theory. But as you can see, we've made significant inroads in the seizures we've made in directly combating it. So the short answer is no, it's not made locally. It comes from outside of the state in large quantity.
Can you describe it, how you mentioned the hierarchy of the distribution? Can you give me some idea of what you mean by the hierarchy distribution? Are we talking 1, 2, 3 dealers, or connection of dealers within a group? Or what's the problem? Who's distributing? Describe that.
So the DEA tells us that the drugs, the methamphetamine that comes into our state and then ultimately into our community is clearly distributed by the cartels coming primarily out of the country of Mexico. And when it gets into Sioux Falls, it comes through a variety of ways, and it gets into those dealer networks. I can't tell you exactly how many there are, but I can tell you in the near future, as these cases break, how many that we have interdicted and interrupted to get to that 133-pound level. So while I don't have those details today, those will be coming out shortly as appropriate as those cases are brought to the light of day.
For both of you, moving forward, I guess, a year from now when we have the same briefings of 2020, what do you guys hope to see?
Well, I can speak for me personally in that I want to continue to see those narcotic seizures go up. I also want to see that violent crime per 1,000 resident number stay flat or decrease, because we know Sioux Falls is going to grow by 3,000 to 5,000 people again this year. With that, you get some bad actors when you add 3,000 to 5,000 people to your community. So when we can keep that number level or declining, and we can get more narcotics poison off the street, to me that's a win for our community, because narcotics fuels a lot of that crime, and that will continue to just add to the safety that we, I think, have come to enjoy in Sioux Falls.
I would certainly echo that, and I would further state that, we know as a police department and law enforcement and crime prevention function that there's things that we can control and things we can't. Well, I tell you the things we can control is the professionalism, the dedication, the focus, determination of not only the officers of our drug task force, but every officer on the street of the Sioux Falls Police Department. And they're going to continue to go after these folks, make these investigations, run them down to the last logical point, and hold people to account, seize those drugs in a very precise and focused way. And we're going to do everything we can to support the public safety of Sioux Falls.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate you guys being here today. Thank you.